week, they'll hear the information. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce once again our speaker for this 6 week series. We're on week 5 now, but our speaker for the Raising Emotionally Healthy Children is here, and her name is Tyjalea Robertson. For those who may not have attended the previous sessions. So she is very versed and knowledgeable when it comes to as far as teaching regarding the mental health field and different aspects. And she has her master's in marriage and family therapy. She's an associate professional counselor and also an associate marriage and family therapist. And one of her specialties that she is known for is integrating faith-based strategies into the field of mental health. And so she's going to tell you a little bit more about herself, but this session for this week is really focusing on grief and loss in adolescence and providing parents with those tools to be better equipped to how to navigate children who are experiencing these feelings. And then also too, this is helpful to any individual that is encountering grief and loss as well. So I will turn it over to you, Tyjalea.
Thank you, Brooke. So I will go straight into the PowerPoint. Again, this week you will see the faith integration because that is particular to my therapy style. The answers that you guys provided in the chat, very good answers, will actually I'll talk about that tonight because those are part of the process of getting through grief. So let's see. Can you see my screen, Brooke?
Yes, I can. And then also to those who are on, just some ground rules I didn't mention, feel free to talk, ask your questions, use the chat, unmute. If you would like to say something, you can just put your hand up or use your hand emoji, or you can unmute. We like it to be a very interactive discussion. And I know at the end we're going to have a Q&A. So if you don't want to ask your questions during the presentation, feel free to ask at the end. So
yes,
I can see your screen.
Thank you. And if you are unable to unmute for any reason, just let us know in the chat and Brooke can unmute it for you. And then if I'm talking and going and you want to unmute and say something, just cut me off because I can't see you. So I can't see if someone's trying to talk. So just go for it. All right. So Brooke, you say you can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this week we are talking about grief and loss pertaining to our adolescents when they have experienced this. And I want to begin with this scripture in Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 4. It says, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. So the context of this scripture is when Solomon is talking about there being a time for everything, right? A season for everything under the heavens. And so, yes, grief, loss, those experiences are inevitable within our human life here on earth, whether it is the experience of grief and loss over a person or a thing, we will experience it. And so this is another topic or area that we are very comfortable and well trained in as clinicians to help individuals work through, right? Just seasons of life, transitions in life, things that happen in life. We have been trained and equipped to help you through these things. So I know in the previous weeks, we've talked about mental disorders or symptoms of them, but not all the time are the things, not all the time the things that people will see us, people will not always see us for things pertaining directly to a disorder. Sometimes it is simply just the fact of living life and how experiencing life will definitely impact our mind and emotions. And so seasons of grief and loss do that. So a lot of us were likely familiar with grief. It is the more common subject versus the things that we have talked about previously. However, I will still go through definitions, right? So grief refers to thoughts, feelings, and behaviors connected to the loss of something important. Grief is normal. So again, I said it is an inevitable experience. There are times in life where we have to grieve something or someone, the change of locations, moving away from people, or maybe someone did pass away. As I'm talking tonight, I will focus particularly on grief pertaining to the loss of a person. However, these things can also be applied to your teen or your adolescent if they are possibly grieving over something different. Maybe they're changing schools, or maybe lost, changing friends, something that is possibly not the passing away of a person. And then there's no right way to grieve. However, you will see me give a general overview of how we as clinicians will move a person through the process of grief, and what that timeline looks like. But there is no right way and there is no actual timeline, but I will discuss generally what grief may look like. And then bereavement, when you hear that term, that is referring to that period of time that someone is mourning the death of a loved one. So there are different stages that a person goes through when they are grieving. And so for the most part, the mental health field has grouped it into 5 common stages that we often talk about. And those stages are denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. So your child will likely feel these things when they are experiencing grief. So denial stage is typically the very first stage that they will experience. That is when they first hear the news, right? That it feels unreal. This can't be happening. Maybe they're still alive. Maybe they can still come back. Those type of thoughts, like it doesn't feel final yet. This doesn't feel like reality. Then there's also the feeling of anger that may occur for them, right? Why is this happening to me? Now, when it comes to anger, that anger can be directed towards anyone or anything, but they will likely feel it. They may be mad at themselves, maybe mad at themselves for maybe something they said or did or didn't do, or while that person was either here or maybe in connection to that person's passing. They may blame themselves for some things or be upset with themselves for some things. They may be angry at the person who has died. They may feel, why did you leave? Why are you not here? Or why did you, if it was a situation where they were in a place at a certain time and that led to their death, they may feel, why were you there? So they may feel these things. And also for those of us who have a relationship with God, they may also feel angry with God. God, how could you let this happen? So yes, if they feel these things, it is a part of the grief process. It is a stage of grief. Then they may also experience the stage of depression. So we did touch on depressive disorder as well as symptoms of depression in the first week. And so that's overall just sadness, low mood, heaviness, fatigue, low motivation. So they may feel, what's the point of going on after this loss, right? Like the person is no longer here, so I don't see what's the purpose of life? What's the point of doing some of the things that I had planned, right? If there's any special events coming up, they may have envisioned that person there. They may have envisioned themselves doing certain things with this individual, and with this individual now being gone, they're really sad. They're feeling really hopeless and discouraged because now what does this mean? Now the bargaining stage is an interesting one, right? So thoughts like, I will do anything to change this. So some people may try and bargain, maybe bargain with God, God, like I would do anything, or I would make sure I really pay attention in school or listen to my parents if you just bring this person back, right? Sometimes the bargaining is in relationship to how that person died. So they may try and change parts of the story or wish that they can change parts of the story. Like, man, if only I had went home earlier that day, maybe they wouldn't left and gone to wherever they went. They may have those thoughts where it's like, it seems like they're trying to change the story. And there's some level of blame that they're taking on, because if only this part of the story had changed, then maybe this person was still here. So that is the bargaining stage. Then there's the stage of acceptance. This is when they not only come to this place where they have accepted that this person has died, this person is no longer here with us, but they make a level of peace with how things will continue to be moving forward. So that is the acceptance stage. Now, the way that I explained it, right, denial, anger, depression, bargaining, acceptance, probably sounds kind of pretty and straightforward, but realistically, on the right side is what it looks like. They may notice that they're jumping around. There was denial, then they were feeling really sad, they jumped to depression, then they were angry, then they were back in depression, then they were bargaining, then they were back in denial, then they were at a moment at acceptance, but then they went all the way back to depression. So, and I don't even want to use the term back, right? Because it's not a going back. All of the changes and fluctuations within the stages is part of the grief process. So they're not going back, they're jumping around, and that is expected. So when you do see your child grieving and you see them going through these stages, know that these stages are normal, they are expected. Now, while we cannot put on a timeline when they will feel angry, when they will feel depressed, none of that, because it could come at any point and it could jump back and forth between the 5 stages. What we can put on a more streamlined process is the different types of grief. So there are 3 types of grief. There's acute grief, integrated grief, and complicated grief. Acute grief, those are the thoughts and the feelings. That is the response that your child will have in immediate response to the news of this person passing away. So that feeling of shock, numbness, trouble sleeping, loss of appetite, isolating themselves, feeling restless, having feelings and thoughts of guilt in relation to the person that has died, poor concentration, intense sadness or anger and outbursts. And as I'm going through this, if you were present during the first and second week where we talked about depression and anxiety, you will notice a lot of these things are very similar to those symptoms. So a lot of these symptoms do show up when basically we are emotionally dysregulated. So that is basically what this is saying. Now, the reason for the emotional dysregulation here is very known. Someone has passed away. So these things will closely mirror things like depression, especially. So you will notice that it is okay that you allow them to go through this stage, because this is the expected and common type of grief that people experience when they learn of someone's passing. Now, next, or the goal, I won't say next. The goal is to transition from acute grief into integrated grief. Now, once they move into integrated grief, at this time, they have now been able to resume some of their normal activities. They've integrated the person's loss into their life, right? They've come to terms with it. They have found a way to accept it and be okay with this new normal. This is the ideal stage of grief that we hope the child gets to after they've moved through or processed the grief. That does not always happen. Sometimes we skip from acute grief, or I won't even say skip. Our acute grief transitions instead into complicated grief. So complicated grief is recognized by having the symptoms of acute grief, but like years later, right? Much time has passed now. And not only are the symptoms mirroring the symptoms of acute grief with the intense sadness, the intense shock, but it's also debilitating, right? They're still unable to continue normal activities. They're still unable to get to school or go to school, or they're still unable to function within their daily activities in the way that they did before this person had died. So this is when their grief has likely transitioned to complicated grief instead of integrated grief. And there's a lot of reasons that a person's grief would become complicated. It could be maybe suppressing the feelings of the grief, not really looking at them, not really facing them, or it could be the nature of that person's death, right? How they died, right? Was there violence involved? Was it sudden? That also could make it a lot more difficult for a person to process their grief. So there's a lot of reasons why someone may go from acute grief and into complicated grief. But the goal is integrated grief. And so in order to get to integrated grief is to healthily move them through the process of grief. And so they have 4 tasks, right, to meet as they move through their grief. Task 1 is to accept the reality of the loss. Coming to terms with the reality that the person has died and that they are not coming back. Once they're able to come to terms with that, then they can move on to task 2. They cannot move on to task 2 without first acknowledging and accepting the reality of the loss, because task 2 is now processing the pain surrounding that loss. So if we have not accepted it, or we still experience a level of denial about it, we cannot even begin to process the actual pain of it. But once they have completed task 1, they've come to accept it. Now they can begin task 2, which is processing the grief, the pain and the grief. And I do not think many adolescents do not necessarily have the tools on their own to complete these processes. And so this is why we're trying to inform the parents, the adults, because it will be your efforts that will help them move through this process. Now, what I mean by processing the pain of the grief, that is them being able to acknowledge and name what they feel. So remember, we went through the stages of grief, that anger, that depression, being able to say, yeah, today I felt sad. I was sad because when I showed up at school, and usually we meet up at break and they weren't there. And then I felt sad. So being able to acknowledge it, name it, know when it shows up, when it typically shows up, because they will notice a pattern of when they do feel certain emotions surrounding the person's passing. Being able to acknowledge when the anger came up, or when they begin to bargain again, or have those questions of why, or what if, and what does this mean? Them being able to acknowledge this thought process for themselves and even express it is going to help them process the pain of the grief, because once they recognize what they're feeling and when they're feeling it, then they know how to respond to it. They won't even know how to begin to respond to the grief and the pain that they are feeling if they're not even fully aware of when certain things are triggering that pain, when certain moments or memories or events are triggering the pain, or they're pushing the thought away. They feel it, but they kind of push it to the side. So they have to be able to acknowledge it and allow themselves to feel it and be okay that it's there, so that they can know how to respond to it. That is going to allow them to process the grief. Task 3 is going to happen naturally as a result of task 2, because once they've learned how to acknowledge what they feel and when they feel it and how to respond to it, they're creating a new normal. So by default, they are adjusting to this new world, this new normal, without the person that has passed away. And then also, we don't only want them to just continue on without the person, but to be able to remember the person, right? That person did live, that person was important to them. So if they can find a way to remember the person, honor the person while moving forward in life, that is task 4, and that is ultimately the steps that you will want to help them move through in order to move through their grief. So here's how you as a parent will help them. You will help them move through their grief through communication. Remember those 2 things I tried to make them easy to remember by kind of grouping them. It is through your communication during this time of your child's grief and through your encouragement of their emotional expression as well as your own emotional expression during this time of grief that will help them move through their grief. So those of you who desire or are open to the faith integration, that is where this comes in. If you are familiar with the story of Job, the story of Job is a good reference for if your child is experiencing grief or you yourself, right? For many of you may be familiar, but if you're not familiar with the story of Job, Job experienced great grief, right? He lost his he lost family members, his children, his livestock, right? That's wealth. So you can think financial loss, and also his health was impacted. So health loss, a lot of things to grieve, a lot of new normals. And in the story of Job, his friends come to him, right, to be there with him in his grief. Now, this is the scripture. It says they cried out in lament, ripped their robes, and dumped dirt on their heads as a sign of their grief. Then they sat with him on the ground. 7 days and 7 nights they sat there without saying a word. So this scripture, for those of you who are open to the faith integration, it will actually help you remember the ways to support your child. There's 2 things in the scripture that stand out to me in how they showed up for him. Does anybody want to point out what they see in the way that they showed up for Job, their friend Job at this time? What do you see in this scripture? What stands out to you in this scripture in how they showed up? What did they do? And you can unmute or you can put it in the chat and Brooke will let me know.
Well, it looks like they kind of joined him in his grief.
Mm-hmm.
They grieved with him
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning, and I guess kind of trying to express or feel what he's feeling so that he won't be alone, by grieving.
That's good. Yep, that is what I noticed. They joined him. And scripture also says to mourn with those who mourn, right? So they cried out, right? So they got in position with him. They didn't leave him alone in his grief. And then there's another thing that I see in there that they did, if anyone could catch it. So them
I
crying out.
think,
Uh-huh.
I think they sat with him without saying a word. They were
Mm-hmm.
waiting for him to, begin speaking. They just sat there with him. It was like they were there just, if you want to talk, you can talk. If you
Mm-hmm.
want to lay your head down, you can lay your head. Whatever you want to do, we are here for you.
Yes, that is the other thing that stood out to me as well.
I would
They,
also say, ladies, sorry to
uh-huh.
disturb. Hi.
Hi.
I think it's also to note that they let themselves grieve, like they threw the mud on their heads, they cried, they dropped themselves on
Yeah.
the ground. So they let
Mm-hmm.
themselves feel the feelings.
Yeah. That putting the dirt on their heads and sitting on the ground with him, you can visually imagine them getting in this lowly state with him. They really met him where he was at. So yes, all those things that you guys pointed out stood out to me. So that's why I say referencing the story of Job could be helpful to for you in remembering how to be supportive of your child during this grief, right? Joining with them in that grief, through however that expression is. That's why I say the emotional expression is how you support them, your own as well, not just encouraging theirs. And then also the communication. So here it says that they sat there without saying a word. And when we're talking about communication, communication does not always require words. So when I say communication, your communication is one of the ways that you will be able to support them. I also mean communicating in your silence, sitting with them, just being present. When there is a loss, especially when someone has died, a lot of times, no one really knows what to say. Sometimes it's too early or too soon to speak and say anything. I think it's helpful to think of, anything you do or say will be used against you. In this moment, when it comes to grief, people they're in a very sensitive state. Your child is in a very sensitive and vulnerable state at this time. So anything you say will hold a lot. They will remember it. It will stick. So don't even feel forced to try and come up with something, right? Because they may have questions. They may say things like, okay, why did this happen? Why did God let this happen? And some of those questions, especially immediately when someone has passed away, you yourself, you don't know the answers to those questions either. And so don't feel that you have to know. Don't feel that you have to come up with an answer. If you don't have it, you can respond with silence or simply tell them, what, I don't know either. I don't know either. Sometimes it's tempting to fill in that space and that silence with, common phrases that people tend to use that I have learned people that are grieving find unhelpful. So I know one of them within at least the Christian culture community is, well, they're with God now, right? They're in heaven now. While that may be true, think about what your child is feeling in that moment. I'm sad because this person is gone. I'm in a lot of pain because this person is gone. So when they hear someone say, they're in a better place now, they're with God now, the reason why that statement can seem to be not comforting is because, yes, they may be with God now, they may be in a better place now, but it doesn't remove the hurt. It doesn't remove the fact that this is very painful. Their absence is very painful. So it can be while it may be true, it could seem very dismissive to what they're feeling. So if you don't know what to say, don't feel forced to say anything. Just be present with them, and that will communicate so much to them. Now, there also is a time where there will be some dialogue, because there are still some things that they probably will need to know. It could be helpful for them to know. So once they are ready to talk, they may ask some questions. And when you do have a conversation with them for the things that they need to know, which I'll share in just a moment, you be very direct, right? So if you are the one to share with them that this person has passed away, you want to be very blunt in the language that you use. So as I've been talking tonight, I've been saying passed away, but actually when you let your teen know that this person has died, you're going to say very explicitly that they have died, right? Not that they have passed away, not that they have gone with the Lord or that we've lost them. And the reason why is because the indirect language that those statements carry can almost add to the state of denial, right? That first stage is denial. That first task is accepting the loss. So we just want to be very direct and very blunt with what has happened. The person has died, and there is a level there is a permanence to it. They're not coming back. So when teens are, they're older, so they understand, yes, they do understand what someone means when they say someone has passed away. But again, in that state, we just want to be as direct as possible to not leave any room for the denial to linger longer than it needs to. And then also, if they're a little young, on the younger side of adolescence, and closer to child age, those statements are like, for example, saying, we lost him, we lost her. They could, in their mind, think, okay, well, can this person be found, right? They don't all the time understand these statements that adults use. So just be very direct. You also can share with them, and probably should share with them, how the person has died, not necessarily all the details, right? You don't want to share anything that's too, that could be traumatizing to hear or learn about, or be just too graphic, but simply telling them how the person has passed could be helpful. I had worked at a school at one time, and we, unfortunately, one of the teens at one of the high schools in the district had passed away. And so all of the clinicians went to that high school to do crisis interventions with the students that were there. And the cops did not reveal the cause of death yet. So no one knew. The children didn't know. We as clinicians didn't know, but we're sitting there supporting them. However, one thing I noticed with all the kids that I was sitting with is that all of them seemed to assume that she died by suicide. But they didn't have confirmation of this yet. And so I share that because it could be helpful just for you. In their situation, they had to wait it out. Things were still being investigated, so they had to wait it out. But while they didn't know, they came up with their own assumption as to what may have happened. And so that's why I share this, because if you know what has happened and you could go ahead and share that with your team, just share it with your team, because when you withhold it and you actually have that information, they're still going to fill in the gap, and they may fill in the gap with the worst thing, right? Something that is not even true, So if you have the information, share with them the information. That would be helpful for them to know. Talk to them about the grief stages that I just talked to you about. Let them know that, if you're feeling some of these things, if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling depressed, those are all things that are part of you grieving. You cared about this person, right? So normalize it for them. Let them know they will feel these things. It's okay to feel angry, right? It's okay to feel all those things. And also not only inform them about what they may feel, but a lot of times if the child is experiencing a loss, if it were not like a friend, a lot of times it probably was a family member that's also connected, or a known friend of the family that is also connected to you and all their other family members. So they may witness, they're not the only ones grieving. They're around you and the other people in the family grieving. So they may also witness other people in the family going through these stages. They may not only experience someone just passed, but how come auntie and uncle are angry and lashing out? What's going on? Family is mad, and this is. Talk about the grief stages with them. Like, yes, sometimes when people are grieving, they feel this and that, angry, depressed. And so this is what you may be seeing from some of the family members right now. They're responding to the grief. So talk to them about it so they know what's going on. They know it's okay for themselves, and it's common, it's expected. You can initiate these conversations about death and about passing, right? Because they may now have a lot of questions. Where is the person? Like, for real, right? Like, people always talk about where someone goes when they pass, but that reality of where are they actually really hits a person, especially a teen, when someone they know has died. They will truly have questions on, okay, what does this all really mean? And so be open to those conversations with them if they do have those questions. And again, if you don't have all the answers to everything, you can let them know. You don't have to fill in the space just to fill it in. Just let them know what you are certain of, and let them know what you also have questions about and maybe don't know for yourself just yet. Keep them informed with what it is expected as far as plans. So a lot of things follow a person's passing. So a lot of arrangements need to be made, funerals, things like that. So you may want to be in contact with your team about what's coming up, what's going to be happening. You can talk to them at this time about traditions, family traditions, faith traditions that you or your family typically participates in when someone does pass. So these life experiences opens those opportunities for those type of conversations. You also need to explain to them any necessary changes that are going to occur because the person has died. So if it were like a parent, right? That's a huge shift, and that's about to be a huge shift in their life. So there's a lot of things that are about to be changing, whether it be like, okay, we've got to move to a different place now, or we're going to move. Any changes that are about to happen in relation to the person passing away, talk to your team about what's about to happen so that they can be informed. And then also when you talk to to your teen, say the person's name. A lot of people hesitate to use the name of the person who has passed away, but it can actually be very comforting for them to hear other people still use that person's name, because that person did live and that person was important to them. When the name is seeming to be avoided, that could begin to feel almost as if the person's existence has left, like the fact that they ever existed has left with them. And that, no one, and if also your teen, does not want that to occur. Like, they want to hold on to the reality that, yes, this person did live, and they did live a whole life. They were a whole person. They had a name. You can say their name. You can talk about them. When I sit with clients that are grieving, I always talk about the person that passed through. Like, I like who were they? Like, what were they like? And you will see, a lot of times you will see them light up to be able to talk about them. They'll share with you, like, oh yeah, no, he was so funny. Like, I remember this one time. Then they will start telling you stories about the person. So this type of conversation does help a lot of times. Now, the emotional expression is you encouraging their emotional expression. So that's, being able to cry, being able to feel all the things that they are feeling, and to say it, right? To share it. And then also encouraging their reflection on the loss. If they do not reflect on the loss, they are likely suppressing it. So when you encourage this emotional expression and this reflection, this is you helping them with task 2. So really quickly, let me back up. Your communication with them through this grief process is helping them to accept the grief. It's helping to remove any denial, or at least move them through that stage as quick as possible so that they can begin to process the grief. So the things that you say to them through your words, through your communication, when you're informing them of the person's death, when you're informing them of how the person died, your communication is helping move them through the stage of accepting it. Then you encouraging their emotional expression is helping them to process the emotions. And there are different ways they can do this, right? So talking it out, being able to talk to someone about the person that has passed away, whether it be just a person's character, or whether it be the actual loss, like how they passed away, or finding out about it. When I sit with clients, I do have them walk me through the story of how they found out. Because it's a life-altering event. It can be very traumatizing to people, that moment where they found out. So it is something that needs to be walked through. So I do have them tell me, where were you at when you found out? How did you find out? And we walk through that whole process. So them being able to talk with someone about it, rather than feeling like, I can't talk to anyone about this, or no one wants to hear me talk about it. People are tired of me being sad. I don't want to show people that I'm still bothered by it. They need to talk about it. They should be able to talk about it with someone. They need to be able to talk about it with someone. If they are someone who journals or would be open to journaling, and it has to be, these things that they are doing to express their emotions have to be in relation to the loss. Journaling about it, right? So if they were talking about their day and writing about their day, today I really missed this person. They were on my mind heavily today. Going to the baseball game, and them not being there this time really made me. If they could journal it out, write it out, that is a part of their expression. That is also a part of them reflecting on how this loss is impacting them. This is moving them through the process of grief. It's helping them to healthily process all of the pain they feel surrounding it. Listening to relatable music. So there are some artists that have songs that were probably inspired by maybe someone in their own life passing away. So those, or maybe or just missing someone. Those type of songs can feel comforting to your teen during that time if there's someone that listens to music, because it lets them know that they're not alone in their experience, right? It is an unfortunate thing to go through and to feel, but there are other people who know exactly, or at least close to what your teen is experiencing, and that could help them feel less alone with what they're going through, especially if the people around them weren't connected to the person that passed and it was just them. If your teen is a creative person, really encourage their creativity during this time if they have the motivation to get involved with it still. It could be a very healthy outlet, because if they create things like music, if they paint, if they do any other expressive arts, journaling and writing is still another one. That's also a creative outlet. These are things that allow them to reflect on the loss and express what they're feeling about it. And they can also determine how they understand the loss. And so when they are processing grief, how they understand the person's passing is ultimately going to determine how this event is going to impact them throughout their life to come, right? So however whatever story they told themselves about the person's loss, that's what's going to follow them. That could be a healthy story, if they healthily moved through it and maybe had someone helping them to decide how they want to understand what happened. Or I've also witnessed times where a person has created a story that does not serve them well. So for example, if someone lost a parent at a very young age, the story that they could tell themselves about it was that their parent left them or abandoned them. And there could be a lot of anger around that, right? And if they continue to allow that to be the story, that is the story. How they live out their life will be in result to the story that they've told themselves about the loss, versus understanding the loss in a different way, in a more healthy and productive way. Engaging in physical activity is also helpful. It is a way that they can express themselves. So if they are in sports, if they could go for a walk, if they could go for a run or do something physical, that can help them, right? It's a healthy outlet. It's a healthy distraction as well. Depending on the type of physical activity, it may or may not allow them to reflect. So walking could allow some reflection. And when I'm talking about reflection, I'm talking about actually allowing themselves to think about the loss in the person. But sports may not allow too much room, like if they're actually like in a game or something, may not allow too much room for reflection, but it is a healthy emotional outlet. So if they are into sports, that is great, because they can channel what they're feeling into something productive. However, if they still never find the time to sit and think about the passing and the person that passed away, they could be suppressing. So they could be getting the emotion out, but actually suppressing the mental processing of what happened, and distracting themselves from actually thinking about how it's affecting them for real. And then meditating is another thing that they can do to allow themselves to reflect. And that's just sitting and giving intentional thought to the situation, the person, and the loss. So they need to be able to express themselves, but they also need to be able to reflect specifically on the person that passed away and the loss, and how the story they want to tell themselves about what happened. And then you, as a parent, be okay with your own emotional expression and take time to care for yourself. So if your child is experiencing the loss of someone that only they know, supporting them through their grief could be a little bit more easy, right? It may be hard to watch them go through it, but you aren't having to simultaneously manage your own grief while they're going through it in that situation. But a lot of times, if that child is experiencing grief, the parent probably knew this person as well, so you're likely feeling your own grief. And be aware of that. Be okay with that. Be okay to allow yourself to cry, to be sad, to be angry. Again, you know the grief stages as well. You're going to feel these same things. Even going back to the scripture with Job, they cried with him, right? They allowed themselves to express these things. I know a lot of times people will say, I couldn't cry, or I didn't want to cry because, I got to be strong. I got to be strong for my this, or strong for my whomever the other loved person is. And truly, your strength is you allowing yourself to have that emotional expression. How you present or respond to your grief, your child sees it, right? I hear things where the child is like, my mom didn't even cry, or my dad didn't even cry. And they're trying to figure it out, like, they do see this. Or on the flip, it sometimes is like, I never seen my mama cry, but seeing it almost released down of like, wow, even my parents feel this. They feel this with me. They feel this, and they are comfortable to show it. So this is only if you do feel yourself wanting to express sadness through tears, versus you don't force it or anything. But I'm saying, if you feel it coming up, allow it to come up. You allowing yourself to show how this is affecting you emotionally, or like that you are sad about it, does not mean you're not showing up for your child. You actually may be modeling very healthy emotional expression for them, and joining them in their grief. They won't feel alone because, wow, my parent is here with me, and they are feeling this with me. They're in this with me. It's not just me. I'm not the only one feeling this level of pain about this or impacted by this. You yourself need to also talk to someone about it. Be able to talk about the loss, be able to talk about the person, whether that is to a peer, right? Another adult, a family member of yours, or to a professional. In the same way, utilize creative expressions, physical activity, and meditation to process the loss. So you also finding those activities that help you. Be okay and comfortable with asking for support from others. You will need it, and it is okay to need it, especially when it's you and your child or children grieving. So ask for support when you need it. And that could also be like, hey, could you take them out for a day, or have them with you for a day, so I can kind of have this time for myself, and you can allow that time to be with yourself, to reflect on the loss within your own space. If you don't feel comfortable doing this in front of the children, right? Take that time for yourself. And also, a lot of times people will offer their help when you are grieving, or if your child is grieving. Get in the practice of saying yes. Yes, can you help me with this? Yes, I would like you to help me in that way. Or be receptive to the requests to help that others offer to you and your family. So when to seek help? You may want to seek help for yourself and your child upon hearing the news of the loss, right? So now you recognize this has happened, we're grieving. So let's kind of get ahead of this and get connected with someone to make sure that we grieve this loss properly and healthily. Or you can seek help when there's an anticipation of a loss. So sometimes when there's maybe like a medical circumstance occurring for someone where they are expecting that this person is going to pass soon, right? Sometimes people will grieve before the actual loss, or they're anticipating the loss. So you can be proactive and get connected with someone at that time. Definitely seek help when you feel or notice that the grief is becoming complicated grief. That's when we said that years have passed, or a significant amount of time has passed, but you or your child are still experiencing that grief with extreme intensity in frequency, and it's also debilitating. Or if you the grief has triggered some dormant mental illness within you or your child. So depression, anxiety. Remember when we talked about depression and anxiety, we said that sometimes events in life can trigger this disorder or this presentation within people. So if you notice that or feel that that may have occurred for you or your child, then that is the time to seek help. Now, where to seek help? So Essentials for Healing, we are always a resource, right? You can connect with us for professional counseling, so that whether that's individual counseling and wanting to sit one-on-one to process the grief with a counselor, or in group counseling. And so I know, so we do have groups ongoing at Essentials for Healing, but I know we are preparing and wanting to have a grief focus group, get that together. So I do want to actually put a poll. Brooke, could you put a poll in the chat? Can you hear me?
Put it in the chat.
Yeah. Could you put the poll in the chat?
Yeah,
I want to see
it's in the chat.
Okay, so if you guys could take a moment to answer that, because we do want you guys to be able to be get insight on what is going on, that we will have this coming up for those of you who are experiencing grief or your child is experiencing grief. We do have this opportunity coming up for group therapy, specifically focused on grief and those who are grieving a loss. And then also there are peer support groups that you may find sometimes within your community. And this is also a group, but it's with usually a group peer counselor. And they will, in the similar way, discuss the topic of grief and the loss that has occurred for the people who are attending the group. And I also added an online resource, which is therapistaid.com, because on there are a lot of worksheets for adolescents that are related to grief, where they have journal prompts. So whether your teen uses this, right, if they're open to using this to help them think about how they're feeling, or if you use this just to reference, okay, what are some of the things that I might talk to my teen about, or that I do need to make sure that they are reflecting on. These are the things, right? Reflecting on, okay, right now, what do I feel? When do I feel saddest? What do I miss about the person? Thinking through those things, that is part of the processing of the grief. So that online resource, I'll go back to it, therapistaid.com. They have a lot of worksheets that can help your child to process the grief if they are someone who wants to answer journal prompts and write down what their thoughts are. All right. So thank you guys. Do you have any questions or thoughts and comments about tonight's topic? We will open it up for that right now.
While we're waiting on persons to mention if they have any questions, I see 4 responses. I did want to highlight something that was just so powerful, which what you alluded to with the scripture of Job. I know with working with a lot of people who interact with other persons who've experienced grief, they're like, what do I say? I don't want to say anything. I'm worried about saying the wrong thing. Or they just want to think of something that's just so comforting to, just easily make the person feel better. And it's just key with looking at that scripture, how, yes, they experienced the emotion with Job, but they sat there being
7
present.
days.
7 days.
A long time sitting in silence.
Some of us can't sit in silence for 1 minute. It's
I
awkward.
know. Yeah, it is awkward. Yeah.
So 7
But that
days.
silence will communicate a lot of comfort.
Yes.
It will communicate your presence.
Yeah. And Stephanie, I think you unmuted.
I was just kind of snickering at what you said. Being quiet. Just being there. Don't have to say a word, because most of the time when this happens, you don't know what to say. What can you say? So it's just just letting them know you're there. just being there, really. You don't even have to let them know, just be there.
Yeah,
So
exactly. A lot of times saying something, the temptation to say something is because we see they're in pain and we're like, okay, we just want you to feel better right away, right? We just want you to feel better. But like, think about it. They just experienced someone they loved or that was important to them pass away. So obviously, like, they're not gonna feel good. So when we are doing and saying things with this pressure to make them feel good, we're almost indirectly communicating. That's why I say your communication with them during this time is important. We're almost indirectly communicating to them that they need to feel better and feel like they need to not feel the discomforts that they're feeling. They need to hurry up and stop feeling it. And they need to stop feeling it because now I'm uncomfortable because they're uncomfortable. So then they feel rushed with their grief. They feel rushed with their grief. They feel like I don't even have a chance to feel what I feel about it. And maybe it's not okay for me to feel any way about it because this person is responding to me in a way of like, okay, feel better already. So our words can communicate the very opposite of what we were hoping they communicated. So sometimes the silence is the most supportive approach.
Even then,
and
you
that
brought
is so true. I was just going to say, just in our humanity, well, first of all, if you're a controlling person, it's really it's really hard not to say something, and then like you said, you want to rush it, you want to make them feel better. But that type of activity or intention, it just it can mess up situations when a person is grieving. So like, you just don't know what to say. And like I said, just being quiet is probably the best, because like you said there, when you try to control it, because that, for me, that sounded like, oh yeah, I'd be trying to control it because I want them to feel better. It's uncomfortable. And I think a lot of times we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because inevitably death and these types of situations is going to come up. So anyway, I'm gone, you guys. I got to feed the kids. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I
You're
enjoyed this.
welcome. You guys will get
God
an email
willing.
after the next one. The next one's in
Yeah.
2 weeks, so enjoy Easter.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh,
And
yeah. Okay.
we will see you
All
in
right.
2 weeks to do the final week of the series.
Okay. Thank you all so much.
You're
You're
It's
welcome.
been a
welcome.
blessing.